Week 14 if you pay attention to the starts and sits with Michael F. Florio, which are, again, available on NFL.com, as they are every single week, NFL.com/start-sit. Mike, let's start with the quarterbacks. Who's going in our lineup?
Look, 2024 has been like the bizarro season. All the older running backs that change teams, that history says don't draft, are just going off. Nothing encapsulates it like Sam Darnold being one of the safest quarterbacks in fantasy football, because that's exactly what he has been. 18 or more fantasy points in all but 3 games since week 2. Multiple passing touchdowns in 3 straight, and 5 of his last 6. He had 4 career games with multiple passing touchdowns coming into this season. The Falcons are top 8 in pass touchdowns allowed on the year and since week 9. And yeah, I think the Vikings are going to want to show up like, hey, we made the right call at quarterback here. You guys did not. And Sam is going to go off. And then Justin Herbert. I know he disappointed last week. He was under pressure constantly, didn't give you a big fantasy day. It does not take away from the fact that in the 5 games prior to last week, he was averaging 21 fantasy points per game. And don't look now, but the Chiefs defense, as great as they are against the run, can be had against the pass. Since week 9, they are top 5 in passing yards allowed. They are 8th in touchdowns allowed. And with Herbert, with the Chiefs taking away the run, I think Herbert will have to throw more than usual in this game.
Yeah, it's so weird still getting unknowns this late in the season, because it was so solid thinking, well, the Falcons only have 10 sacks, so they're not going to bother Herbert. 33% of their sacks now have come against Justin Herbert in that game in Week 13. Such a wild situation. A wild situation. We have all these buys, but we still have to bench somebody, so who are people going to be complaining about? You said he was sit. I had to sit somebody.
Yeah, I have Tua as a sit this week, and I know it's tough with 6 teams on bye. Like, I have a 2-quarterback league where I still need to play him. But as of late, he's been great. Those have come in either 1, great matchups, or 2, when he is chasing points. I don't expect really either of those this week. The Jets have allowed the 2nd fewest passing yards and the fewest passing touchdowns to quarterbacks. In 5 career games against them, he has averaged 189 passing yards per game and has just 6 passing touchdowns. Plus, the Jets don't score a whole bunch of points, so I don't think it's going to be a game where he has to throw to kind of keep track with them. But hey, Jet fans, don't worry. A documentary is coming out where you can watch how you got to 3-9 this season.
Yeah, and you can watch as we don't watch that particular documentary. So we got our starts and sits at the quarterbacks. Let's go over to the other position. Mike, who's going on our lineups at the running back spot?
I was insanely high on Isaiah Pacheco all offseason long. He's been back for 1 game. His angry feet. I feel bad for the grass in Kansas City because he is back. Last week, just played a third of the snaps, 7 carries, 1 target. Did turn that into 49 yards, but he looked better and was more explosive than Kareem Hunt. And I expect his workload to increase week to week moving forward. And the Chargers, I know they have a reputation of being a good run defense, but since week 9, they've allowed the 8th most rushing yards and explosive runs at the 5th highest rate. So 6 teams on bye. Yeah, I'm getting Isaiah Pacheco in my lineups. I am also starting Tyrone Tracy Jr. against the Saints. Since week 5, he has averaged 14 fantasy points per game. He brings a safe floor. There's upside there as well. He has really taken over 70% of the snaps in 3 of his last 4 games, and the Saints here are a great matchup. 7th most fantasy points per game to running backs. Explosive runs are allowed at the 7th highest rate, and they give up 5.2 yards per carry. That is the highest in the NFL. So go and get Tyrone Tracy into your lineups this week.
Yeah, even with the Rizzy improvements, the lasting memory I have from last week is Kyron Williams on a 3rd and must-have, having a long run against the Saints. That defense still kind of vulnerable. So who are we sitting at running back?
The Gus Bus. We are parking it. We are putting it on, we're taking it off the road and parking it. 52% of snaps last week, just 6 carries, 1 target, turned that into 33 yards. And the Chiefs, they are the toughest matchup. They've allowed the fewest fantasy points per game to running backs, fewest rushing yards, 3rd fewest receiving, just 6 touchdowns allowed to the position, explosive runs rate they give up at the lowest rate in the NFL. Do you need more reasons to sit Gus Edwards this week? Because I think the matchup, the fact that he shares with other backs there, everything points to putting him. I'm starting Sincere McCormick over him in the league this week, so that's where we're at right now.
I mean, judging based off the numbers, Sincere McCormick might be the best running back we've seen in a very long time. We got more starts and sits with Mike coming up later. But speaking of quarterbacks and running backs, we need some sleepers, Marcus.
That's what we're going to do right now, Patrick. We have some sleepers for Week 14. We got a couple quarterbacks, or at least a quarterback, and a couple running backs to take a look at. We're going to start with a guy that Patrick talked about earlier in the show, and that is Will Levis. The beauty of Will Levis is that he really has been generous on both sides of the ball. He's been helping out his pass catchers. He's also been helping out the opposing defenses. Although last week, no turnovers. Just the second time this season, only the fourth time in his career he went through a whole game without giving the ball away. 16 or more fantasy points 3 times in the last 4 games, going against that Jacksonville defense we have targeted all year. Most fantasy points allowed per game to quarterbacks, second most pass yards, second most passing touchdowns allowed. Now we're going to go over to Chicago. I told you I like Rashawn Johnson as a deep sleeper. I also like DeAndre Swift against the 49ers. I get it. The last 2 weeks have not been great for Swift in a fantasy perspective, but they also have come against 2 of the worst matchups, going against the Vikings and Lions run defenses. He has run the ball well in positive matchups, and right now the 49ers are definitely that. They have given up 389 rush yards in the last 2 weeks, third most in the league. Also, poor tackling has really hurt San Francisco's defense. They've given up the most yards after contact since week 10. This game, I don't know how to really feel about it. It's going to be interesting, but I do think DeAndre Swift can have a nice one, especially if he can find his way into the end zone. And, all right, I don't know if this is a deep sleeper or not, but, there are names that are kind of hard to come by. Tony Pollard, though, one to keep an eye on. With a healthy Tyjae Spears, Pollard's snaps have been decreasing recently, but he has still been the best all-around back there in Tennessee. And yes, we are picking on the Jaguars defense again. Second most fantasy points per game allowed to running backs, fourth most receiving yards to the position, most total touchdowns allowed to running backs as well. So Tony Pollard, chance to eat coming up this week. We're feeling pretty emotional about some of those sleepers. We're also feeling some kind of way about a couple of Rams. I mean, there's no way to feel about Puka except positive, right? And like with Kyren Williams, I know it's kind of been a mixed bag. We're going to use some little digital faces and those sorts of things to tell you how we're feeling about these fantasy guys next.
Fantasy football as we get to the starts and sits here on Fantasy Live. NFL.com/start-sits to see the full list. We're going to focus on wide receivers and tight ends. Who are we starting for the fast guys out wide?
Perhaps the most underrated wide receiver for fantasy football purposes, Jakobi Meyers. I mean, what this guy does just goes completely under the radar. Since week 3, nearly 16 fantasy points per game. His low game in that span is 8.8. And 3 times he has topped 18. So he brings a safe floor, he brings upside, and a very happy median. And AOC looks like a quarterback upgrade, which could help elevate the ceiling for Jakobi Meyers in fantasy. And the Bucs have allowed the 6th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. And they're going to score plenty of points. So the Raiders are likely to be in catch-up mode. And then 6 teams are on bye this week. Let's get weird. MVS, I am starting him this week against the New York Giants. 18 fantasy points per game in the last 3 games. We know he is boom or bust, but he is the new Rashid Shaheed for this Saints offense, and there is a great chance to go boom this week because the Giants have allowed a 68% completion percentage on deep passes this year. For context, no other team is above 46%. They are at 68%. They have allowed by far the highest passer rating as well. So you need someone that is going to kind of flip your week and give you a lot of upside if you have a bunch of buys. MVS can do exactly that.
The fun thing, when he scored that touchdown last week, that was the 4th touchdown. That was on 8 catches at the time for MVS. Just incredible numbers. Maybe he keeps that going. Let's go over to the tight ends. What are we doing there?
Well, for a sit, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Wide receiver. I just got lost in the MVS
I'm very
light.
excited for
the
that.
shine of MVS.
Marcus, you might want to cover your ears
no.
here because I think Deebo Samuel is a potential sit this
You're not
week.
wrong.
Marcus agrees, so that's where we're at with the 49ers right now. But Deebo has fewer than 13 fantasy points in 5 straight games, fewer than 7 fantasy points in 3 straight, and in his last 2, he has scored 4 or less. It just continues to get worse and worse for him, and with no CMC, no Jordan Mason, I think he's going to be utilized more as a runner, which some people might view as a positive. I see as like you're not getting points for catches anymore. And then the Bears, 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers, bottom 10 in YAC allowed to wide receivers. 6 teams are on bye, so not a must sit. But if you have the capability, another option you feel good about, I would play it safe and get away from Deebo.
And also, if you're keeping start-sit stats, that's the 3rd time this season I've forgotten the sit at the wide receiver spot. Now, Mike, let's go ahead and get a tight end that we're getting in our lineup.
Oh. I'm waving the white flag.
No.
I'm Oh, wait, I'm starting someone first. I'm out of order now.
I made you forget.
I'm starting Jonnu Smith. Why? Because I want to see Laquan Jones with blonde hair this year. For those of you who don't know, if Jonnu finishes top 5, Laquan Jones has to dye his hair blonde. Why? Because he made this bet against himself. There's nothing if he doesn't finish top 5. But me and Marcus want enjoyment. We want to see him looking like Slim Shady on our podcast. So if he finishes as a top 5, which, look, he's been surging. He's the tight end 1 in the last month. You're riding the hot hand. You're starting Jonnu Smith.
Okay, so we're starting Jonnu.
Now,
Who we sitting?
I can wave the white flag.
There it is.
Kyle Pitts. I'm sorry, everyone. Look, for 3 years, I have been chasing that Kyle Pitts rookie year. I have been telling you it's not his fault. It's the quarterback. It's the play callers. It's all of this. There's a new quarterback this year. There are new play callers, and it is still not happening. I thought it did. I called him a breakout tight end. Since then, in his last 4 games, 13.5 fantasy points total, 12 targets, 75 yards, a big donut in your lineup last week. You could blame Kirk Cousins. I know he's throwing it like a little league pitcher out there, lobbing it up like my slow pitch softball guys do, but it's just simply not happening for Kyle Pitts, so it's time to wave the white flag, and as Patrick told me in the break, this is going to be the week he goes off now. And then I have Tucker Kraft as a sit, just because the Lions, they've allowed the fewest fantasy points per game, fewest yards, and just 1 touchdown to the tight end position this year. Tucker Kraft is big play or touchdown reliant, so I don't like his chances of doing that this week, and he was held to less than 8 fantasy points in week 9 against this Lions team, so if you have the capability, I would try to get away.
They are the tight end erasers, so if we sit a guy that's put up points, we need some sleepers, Marcus.
We absolutely need some sleepers. So we've got some pass catchers that fall into the sleeper category here in Week 14. You heard Florio just now talking about Kyle Pitts. I'm going to talk about one of his teammates, and that is Darnell Mooney, who we talked about a lot early in the season. He's been mostly a matchup-based starter all year long, but second in most major receiving categories on this team, behind only Drake London. Great matchup against the Vikings, who are giving up a lot of catches and a lot of yards to the position. Now, the question is, it looks like Kirk Cousins is going to be the starting quarterback again, but which version of Kirk Cousins are we going to get? You heard Florio saying he looks like a little league pitcher. As a wise kid once told me, we want a pitcher and not a belly itcher. Hopefully, Darnell Mooney is able to get the good version and be productive against the Vikings. Looking for a tight end sleeper. We're going with Pat Freiermuth. Starting to see more work in the Pittsburgh passing game. Last couple of weeks actually leads the team in receptions and receiving yards, gone 10 for $127 in those 2 games. Now, look, the Browns are sort of middle of the pack against fantasy tight ends, but this is about potential volume. If Cleveland's able to move the ball and score points, that means Russell Wilson and the Steelers have to keep throwing it. And as long as this game isn't played in a snow globe, maybe the conditions will be a little bit better for Pat Freiermuth to get some more targets. And bit of a deep sleeper at the wide receiver position this year. We are going to Kansas City and giving you Xavier Worthy. When the Chiefs and Chargers played back in Week 4, Worthy had a season high in receiving yards, 3 catches for 73 and a touchdown. Now the question becomes, can this Chargers offense sustain possessions against this Kansas City defense? Otherwise, this means more opportunities for the Chiefs to get going. Yes, DeAndre Hopkins is there, Travis Kelce is there, but maybe they take some attention away from Xavier Worthy, and Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes able to work up some ways to get him the football. Coming up, we're going to go all George Herman Ruth. We're going to call our shot. It's Bijan, it's Barkley, it's Burrow. I don't know, maybe we have some guys whose names don't start with B. You're going to stick around to find out if that's the case on NFL Fantasy Live.